just needs some love, Chloe said, her voice too bright in the quiet. Liam forced a smile, but his eyes were drawn to the window. The woods began just 20 feet from the back door. The trees so close together, their branches formed an impenetrable canopy, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. That first night, the sounds began. Not the normal rustles of a forest, but something else. A low, rhythmic creaking, like two great boughs of a tree rubbing together in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. Creak, pause, creak. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, heavy, patient footsteps circling the cottage. Liam shone a flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught nothing but the skeletal forms of the nearest trees. "It's just the house settling," he told Chloe, who was huddled under the blankets, or an animal. The creaking continued until dawn. Chapter 2. The days were a frantic attempt to impose normalcy. They cleared brush, aired out rooms, and tried to ignore the oppressive presence of the woods. Chloe, a botanist, was the first to notice the strangeness of the local flora. "These ferns, they shouldn't be growing in this soil. And look at the pattern of the moss on the oak," she said, pointing to a tree whose trunk was spiraled with a peculiarly uniform emerald green moss. "It's almost intentional." Liam, meanwhile, found his great-aunt's journal in a kitchen drawer. The entries started out normally, detailing her solitary life. But over time, the handwriting became more frantic. October 12th. "The creaking is closer tonight. It stops by the back door. I think it's listening." November 3rd. "The woods are growing. Not out, but in. I found the same spiral moss on my garden fence this morning. It wasn't there yesterday." December 1st. "It mimics now. Last night I heard my mother's voice calling from the tree line. 'Eleanor, come out, I'm lost.' But mother has been dead for 20 years." Liam closed the journal, a cold dread seeping into him. He didn't show it to Chloe. That afternoon, Chloe didn't come back from her walk. Liam called for her until his voice was hoarse. As the sun began to set, he saw her, standing at the very edge of the woods, staring into the darkness. "Chloe!" he yelled, running to her. She turned, her face pale and confused. I thought I heard a child crying. It sounded so real, so scared. I was just trying to find it." Chapter 3. The mimicry was the most terrifying weapon the woods possessed. Over the next few days, they heard it all. A woman sobbing, a dog whining, the distinct sound of their own car engine starting. Each time, the sound was designed to lure, to pull them just a little closer to the waiting trees. They decided to leave. They would pack the car first thing in the morning and abandon the cottage and its cursed inheritance. But in the night, a storm rolled in, a violent, shrieking gale. They were awakened by a sound that cut through the wind, a tremendous, splintering crack. They looked out the front window. A massive, rotten oak from the edge of the woods had fallen, perfectly blocking the only road out. It was no accident. It was a barricade. The power died. In the pitch black, with only the flicker of their lanterns, the creaking started again. But it was different now. It wasn't circling the house. It was at the door. Creak, creak, creak. Something heavy was dragging itself up the porch steps. Liam grabbed a fire poker. Chloe held a kitchen knife, her knuckles white. They watched in horror as the thick, wooden front door began to bulge inwards, the grain of the wood straining as if under immense pressure. From the other side, a voice spoke. It was a perfect imitation of Liam's own. "Chloe, let me in. I'm scared out here. Please let me in." Chloe gasped, taking a step forward. Liam grabbed her arm. "It's not me," he hissed. The thing outside fell silent for a moment. Then it spoke again, this time in Chloe's sweet, melodic voice. "Liam, honey, I'm hurt. My ankle. I think it's broken. Please, open the door. It's so cold." The doorknob began to jiggle, then rattle violently. The wood around the lock started to splinter. Chapter 4. They're trying to get us to invite it in, Chloe cried, remembering the journal entry about the mimicry. It needs permission. Stay away from the windows, Liam shouted, pulling her back as a long, thin, branch-like shadow fell across the curtain. They retreated to the kitchen, the most defensible room. The assault on the front door stopped. For an hour, there was only the sound of the storm. Then, a new sound came from the back of the house, a gentle tapping, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the small high window above the sink. They looked up. A face was pressed against the glass. It was made of woven twigs, moss, and peeling bark, but it had formed a horrifyingly human-like shape. Where eyes should be, there were only dark, hollow pits. Sap, thick and amber-like, oozed from a gash that served as a mouth. It tilted its head, and the tapping continued with one long, gnarled finger. It was studying them. Chloe screamed. The thing at the window recoiled slightly, as if startled by the sound. Then, it slowly smiled, the bark around its mouth cracking open. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, listening as the things outside, the wicker walkers, as Chloe had started calling them, scratched at the walls and whispered their stolen voices. Chapter 5. Dawn brought no relief. The storm had passed, but the woods had advanced. The spiral moss now coated the entire outside of the cottage, creeping up the walls like a green disease. Overnight, thorny black vines had grown over the windows, plunging the interior into a deep gloom. They were being entombed. Liam knew they had to try for the car. It was their only chance. They would make a run for it, climb over the fallen tree, and hope the engine would start. On 3, he whispered, his hand on the back doorknob. We run straight for the car. Don't look back. He yanked the door open. The world outside was wrong. The path to the car was gone, swallowed by a thicket of brambles that hadn't been there yesterday. And standing between them and their escape were 3 of the wicker walkers. They stood unnaturally still, their twig and moss bodies blending seamlessly with the forest behind them. The one in the center took a lurching step forward, its movements accompanied by that same awful creaking. It raised an arm, pointing a branch-like finger at Chloe. Stay, it rasped, its voice the sound of dry leaves crunching underfoot. Grow. Chloe froze, mesmerized by the hollow pits of its eyes. No, Liam shouted, swinging the fire poker. It connected with the creature's arm, which snapped with a sound like breaking kindling. Instead of sap, a black, viscous liquid seeped out. The creature didn't scream. It just tilted its head, curious. The other 2 began to advance. Liam grabbed Chloe's hand. The woods, it's our only way. It was an insane gamble. But the road was blocked. The cottage was a trap. They had to go through the one place the things called home. They plunged into the whispering wood. The temperature dropped instantly. The light faded to a sickly green. Behind them, they heard the slow, deliberate creaking of the wicker walkers giving chase. They were not running. They were herding. Chapter 6. The forest was a labyrinth. Trees seemed to shift to block their path. Roots rose from the ground to trip them. They heard voices everywhere, their own, their friends, their parents, calling from the shadows, begging for help, trying to lead them astray. Exhausted and disoriented, they stumbled into a small, circular clearing. In the center stood the oldest, largest tree they had ever seen. Its bark was black and deeply furrowed, and from its massive, skeletal branches, one of the pods, lower than the others, was split open. Something was inside, something pale. Chloe crept closer, then stumbled back with a choked cry. It was a human skeleton, woven into the very fiber of the pod, its bones threaded with fine white roots. On its finger was a tarnished silver ring, the same ring their great-aunt Eleanor was buried with. This was the wood's larder. This was what happened to those who stayed. The creaking surrounded them. The wicker walkers emerged from the trees. forming a silent circle around the clearing. They weren't attacking, they were waiting. The great black tree shivered. A deep, grinding sound emanated from its core, a voice made of shifting earth and groaning wood. You are home. You are soil. You are seed. Liam looked at Chloe, seeing the same hopeless terror in her eyes. There was no escape. The woods had them. He dropped the fire poker. It was useless. As the wicker walkers closed in, their twig-like fingers reaching, he pulled Chloe into a final, desperate embrace. The last thing Liam felt was not pain, but a strange, cold numbness spreading from his feet upwards, as if he were turning to stone. The last thing he saw was Chloe's wide, terrified eyes, just before a delicate tracery of white roots began to crawl across her cheek, pulling her head gently, firmly towards the rich, dark soil. Epilogue. A year later, a surveyor's team, sent to reassess the remote valley, found Blackwood Cottage. It was almost completely reclaimed by the forest. The spiral moss covered it entirely, and the thorny vines had pulled part of the roof down. In the clearing deep in the whispering wood, the great black tree stood, its branches heavy with new, green pods. Two of them, hanging side by side, were still fresh and closed tight. What the Woods Grew Back, Chapter 1. The inheritance of Blackwood Cottage was less a gift and more a burden wrapped in legal paper. For Liam and Chloe, it was also an opportunity. Burnt out from their city jobs and drowning in debt, the idea of a fresh start in the remote, forest-clad valley was a desperate lifeline. The journey was long, the roads growing narrower and more neglected, until they were little more than dirt tracks. When they finally arrived, the cottage was both smaller and more foreboding than the photos suggested. It was a squat, stone thing, hunched against the dense wall of ancient trees known as the Whispering Wood. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The key, left under a moss-covered rock, turned with a groan. The interior was a time capsule of their great-aunt Eleanor's life, dusty, draped in sheets, and filled with the unsettling, watchful silence of an abandoned place.